Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Elting, and I serve as the Program Manager for the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology. It is a joy to welcome you here tonight for this resident talk. Sitka is located at Cascade Head on the north central Oregon coast and resides on the unceded traditional lands of the Indigenous people, now represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. There is much to learn. Just one step we can take, especially when planning a visit to Sitka or the coast, is to visit the Grand Ronde T'Challa Museum and Cultural Center. It is now my pleasure to introduce the first of tonight's residents, Kiyomi Fukui. Kiyomi is an artist and educator based in Long Beach, California. She works with printmaking, drawing, natural dye, and, at times, social interactions. Irrespective of the media, her works are process-oriented, considering both the physical and immaterial, such as conversations, interactions, and memory. Her recent work utilizes mineral and botanical pigments. While extracting these pigments, she holds dearly the sentiments associated with the respective land or plants, sentiments which she calls ghosts. The resulting images and objects explore emotional resonances within their arrangements. Welcome to Sitka, Kiyomi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. It is such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for allowing me to spend time there at Sitka. That was 2 weeks over the holiday, and it was truly a dream time. So here we are. First, I wanted to sort of introduce where I am and what my interests are in my practice. So here you go. These are sort of in older works, but I feel like it gives a good context to what I do. Okay, so this one is called Tea at 3307. It was a non-monetary tea shop that we set up at this one artist-run space called the 3307 West Washington Boulevard. It was the address and then the name of the space. And space was run by Amanda Martin Katz. She's also an artist. Anyways, so we had this tea shop and then we would invite the guests, and over the course of the day, they would, make the stain onto this tea mat, which was just a washi paper that I cut out to be the circle. And then so like at the end of the day, it would kind of look like this. It's just like bunch of different colored teas and materials. Each day was sort of like represented by that tea mat kind of things. Like that was the idea, I guess, is to kind of capture this conversation and interactions. By the way, they didn't pay for the tea. It was non-monetary. Instead of paying for the tea with money, they would pay with conversation and their presence. That was the idea. I had another work that I kind of want to quickly touch base on, which is called Apologetic Garden. It was basically a bunch of envelopes that I made and then screen printed this sentence, I am sorry. And I made the ink with a rice starch and beet juice and all these organic things. So it was biodegradable. And I would invite the participants to write a letter of apology, and they would encase little seeds in it so that you can plant it into the soil and that sort of like have its own life cycle, almost like you would see the plant grow into something else. And it was my way of kind of having that unsaid apologies and regrets have its own course of life and come to terms with it. I guess I have to probably skip a lot of those works, but all of them kind of have this play with materials. Like this one was meant to fade in the sunlight, was made with pokeberry juice, which is toxic to eat. You do not want to eat it, but the color it gives is this beautiful magenta that fades in the sun very quickly. So like a couple months later, it did not look like this. And there were a lot of kind of things going on with the concepts, but I'm not going to go too much into it. Feel free to put it in a question, I guess, if anybody is curious about it, because I was telling Maria earlier that I chat too much and I don't want to exceed 10 minutes. So there you go. Here's more. By the way, this was a collaboration work with a poet, and this is a collaboration work with my partner, Michael Nannery, and he built this wooden frame for a space divider. And we both dyed the fabric and painted it with all these different materials. Like this was indigo. It's fresh indigo that I mixed up with a little bit of guar gum, so it had a little body. And like this is Michael doing his thing. And yeah, so like it was about a life cycle of salmons. And you would see like all these little tiny dots were meant to be the salmon eggs. And it's kind of like growing into different stages of its life kind of thing. And this is my really, really good friend. I miss her so much. Shihori Nakayama is her name. She's in Japan now, but her family for the longest time had a farm and avocado grove in California. And sadly, they had to give up on that farm. And so that meant that she was losing her childhood home. And this is an avocado grove. And we collected a bunch of avocados there, and I dyed some things with it and made pigments, lake pigments with it. And also like in that farmland is just like a riverbed, and we would collect all these like earth pigments from there. So like for me, this was my way of capturing her sentiment of the losing of a childhood home kind of thing. This is me making my indigo pigments, gum from a peach tree from a backyard that we used to live in. We had to move. This is a California golden bush. This is grown from a cutting that we rescued from this Trump golf course in Palos Verdes. They grew so big, and we couldn't bring it with us when we moved, but it gives us really beautiful yellow. And this is me swatching and testing out all these different pigments that I made. What's underneath is a wood block. I've been carving it and printing it with this technique called mokuhanga, which is another word for Japanese wood block printing. And I guess like, it's my background. I was trained as a printmaker, so I think it's always kind of in my subconscious that I want to go back to making prints and like play with paper and pigments and all that stuff. So these are my works with mokuhanga and collage, kind of like making these arrangements. And this is one of the series, I guess. And you can kind of see if I go up close, I don't know if I can, yeah, a lot of silhouettes from botanical plant matters. And basically, I like to collect like plant matters and impress them in my sketchbook. That's like what I do. All these silhouettes were supposed to kind of trace back that journey too. This is from a trip I took with Michael last summer to Japan, and this was us visiting my mom's graveyard. You can kind of see that this is actually mugworts, all kinds of like mugworts that was growing at the grave site. It's not just mugworts, actually. You would see like lavender. This is actually taken from my walks here in California and some of the sunflower and whatnot, but it kind of traces the journey that we took from here to Japan and back and all that stuff. So this was made for my friend. I still have it. I want to give it to her very quickly. I still have it. And then here's another work, and you can kind of see that there's a lot of like arrangements with organic matters and some geometric things maybe, or silhouettes and whatnot. This is in mokuhanga, but the matrix is still woodcut. And I was working with a oil-based ink with this one, but I made a bunch of prints with the matrix and cut everything out and collaged it together. In a back kind of underpainting is made with indigo, so like that was a whole another story, I guess. Like I don't really do indigo vat. I usually just use it as a pigment, and that was a whole another story of me overheating it, killing it once, and like having a meltdown and then having to come back from it. But it was a beautiful process. I did really enjoy getting to work on a large scale like this. And then coming back to Sitka, sorry, okay, good. So with this residency, I really was interested in looking at different ochre, like mineral pigment was something that I really was excited to work with. This is from a walk that I took with Camilla Taylor, another artist who shared that residency time during the holiday season. And then yeah, this is from where we did the kayaking, I guess, a little bit on the other side of it, but basically that mouth of the river. We took some walks there. This was red ochre I collected there. And this is something that Camilla spotted on our hike on a trail. It's like a little red patch of a patch of red ochre we found. And I'll show you how that looks like as a pigment in a minute. This was a block that I was working on. I was excited about the idea of ghost forest, the Nescoen ghost forest. This is actually an image of a canopy of Sitka spruce. Basically, the ghost forest is those Sitka spruce, the ancient forest that was covered by the sand and then underwater for a long time for it to be petrified. And this is not the image of a petrified wood, but the canopy of the forest. And I was kind of imagining like above ground and underwater type of a scenario. I had to kind of put a stop on this coming back from residency because I realized that the deadline was fast approaching and I had to I had to come up with some way of working with the block and expedite the process. So like I had to come up with a different image actually, but I am gonna come back to this. I am, and I'm gonna spend a lot of time on this, and I cannot wait to do that. But for now, I had to expedite and work with photograph and a laser cutter. This is the stump that's covered in barnacles and whatnot, and here is more close up of the laser cut version. And here's some minerals they collected. And I've been mulling all the pigments and processing it. Vivianite, I want to talk so much about Vivianite, but I realized the time is ticking. So if anybody's curious why I'm so interested in Vivianite and why I'm so excited about it, please ask a question about it. Here's the yellow ochre, and then here's the last picture I have of all the pigments that I've been processing, and I'm very excited to put that on paper with my block like that. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiyomi, for presenting for the Sitka community this evening. I'm actually quite curious as to why you are interested in that material. Would you share? Stacy Meyer agrees with me.
Okay. So Vivianite, the blue you saw, it's also called blue ochre. Basically, it's called mineral of the dead. I'm
Mm.
so excited about the name too. But the reason why it's called that is because it is basically iron and phosphate that's merged like some sort of chemical reactions that happens together, and it occurs when the body, the organic materials dies and decays, and it kind of has to happen at the perfect condition of like non-oxidation, and then like all these really cool things. But yeah, like the site Ghost Forest is supposed to be known for all these like spruce cones that are replaced by Vivianite inside, and I was so over the moon about it. But yeah, I couldn't find it. That's why I had to buy blue ochre.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. We'll have to have you back so you can find those pine cones. Our next presenter is Jeannie Hua. Since graduating in 2022 from the MFA program at the Art Institute of Chicago, Jeannie has participated in the long-form residency at the Oxbow School of Art and Artist Residency. She has an upcoming solo show at Gallery 456 in New York City, scheduled from February 21st to March 7th, 2025. She had a solo show at Court Contemporary as a part of the Post Invisibles 2024 Biennale, with 15 simultaneous shows in Montreal, Toronto, Lyon, Paris, Mexico City, the Bahamas, and Las Vegas. Jeannie has taught various collage workshops, including at the Oxbow School of Art. Her work has been shown at the Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition and First Street in New York, as well as Agitator and Women Made in Chicago. She is currently adjunct faculty in art and art history at the College of Southern Nevada. Please join me in welcoming Jeannie to Sitka.
Hi, everybody. It's such a privilege to be able to share my art with all you wonderful creatives and lovers of art. My current series of art that I've been working on started when I discovered the anecdotal history of 10 to 15 Chinese immigrants buried under mining waste in a small mining town in Tonopah, Nevada. And it wasn't from an accident. When you drive into this small mining town, you'll chance upon a motel called the Clown Motel. And it's a purple structure covered in bright polka dots. And right next to the Clown Motel is the historic Tonopah Cemetery, where all the important white people are buried. And the cemetery is fenced in, and tombstones were essentially, they use prison labor to reconstruct and maintain the cemetery. And outside of the fenced cemetery is a huge pile of mining waste called tailings. And that's where the 10 to 15 Chinese immigrants are buried. And when I went to visit the town, everybody living in there were very open about it. And they kind of just freely admit to the situation. And so when I had an opportunity to depict the situation at a window installation at the Barrack Museum, I had to ask myself, well, Do I want it to be representational? Do I want it to be a painting or a photograph or a series of photographs or collages? Because I pretty much started out as a collage artist. And I decided that I was I was very much influenced by the poetry of Victoria Chang and her book of poetry called Obit, where her poems were in the format of obituaries about her father and her mother. And at that time, her father was still alive. And it taught me how we can extract certain cultural functions and formats and apply it as an artistic device. The image on the very left is a digital image printed on metal, and it's essentially about 4 by 3 feet. And I wanted to deal with the temporality of the situation, because when you come upon the citizens of Tonopah, they act as if it was some kind of accident. They didn't mean it to happen, but since it happened, that's the situation, that's it. And that's simply not true. With land use, you have a city or a county committee or council that has to conduct open meeting laws and discuss the zoning of a piece of property and whether or not it should be residential, whether or not it should be commercial, whether or not it should be set aside for historic purposes. And I wanted a format that dealt with the past, present, and future of that piece of land. And so when I was given a window installation outside of barracks, I was warned to not make my art too dark because it will reflect everything but the art. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to lean into it. And so I decided to use the format of an architectural print to show the situation. And so on the left-hand side is the tailing. And then on the right-hand side is the cemetery. But you don't even need to understand the specific situation. You can see that there's two different styles of architecture, West and Asian. And you can see that it's an image of delineation, of borders, of boundaries, of division. And so when I installed it, you can see how the environment, and if you were to stand in front of it, that your reflection would be in front of this image, which also conceptually mirrors literally how people see art. They see themselves in the art, or they see themselves not in the art, but the self is always the referential point. So my next piece, I wanted to use oil because that is the medium of the colonizers. And I wanted to use Christianity. I wanted to refer to Christian images because that is the rationalization for imperialism and colonization. I'm also a collage artist. And what I did was I used image transfer and joss paper in this collage. Chinese people burn joss paper to worship their ancestors. And at that point, I was also teaching art history, and I found the deterioration and the obscurance of images on mosaics and murals to at first be frustrating. But then I decided to lean into it and to really embrace the deterioration. This is another image. It's indoctrination. This is one of my favorite pieces, Minoan snake goddess. I combined it with the Tripmaster's monkey from Journey of the West. And it's just the best example of breasts being presented in the scariest, most aggressive and grand way in art. If you've seen the actual sculpture, it's just amazing. And these are some more. This is also with joss paper. This is with joss paper on top of newspaper. This is image transfer on canvas with gold leaf. I wanted to use gold to refer to kind of contrast the roughness of the image transfer. And that's also joss paper in red. Just gonna go through these images. And these reflect the grief that I felt when I made the discovery about the unmarked graves, because in every specificity, there's universality, and it highlighted the fact that there are millions of BIPOC and LGBTIA plus bodies buried in unmarked graves. Discarded ones are utilitarian purposes have been used up and were cast aside like ephemera. This is also with Joss paper on top of image transfer. And this is called absolution. And I put that little Chinese dragon there on purpose because we're part of the landscape, whether you like it or not. We're not the same style. We don't look like we fit, but we're in the same painting, baby. You can't get rid of us. Okay, so I was at the Oxbow residency and I started making greenware that's made to dissolve in soil to recreate or reanimate what happened with the bodies that went unrecorded. And this is greenware that I made where I combined locally sourced clay with the chemical compounds released by the human body when it decays in soil. So it's calcium, nitrate, phosphate, magnesium. And I tucked them under the molds. You can see on the top right one, I put it on top along with suet and bird seeds, and something really cool happened. And so this is made to dissolve back into the soil and benefit the soil, and also recreates what happened to the bodies buried in soil. So what happened was it grew mold. It's the coolest thing. I just loved it. It freaked me out at first, but then the gardeners in my group explained that, well, that's, it's doing what you set out to do. I just loved it. I just loved it. Oh my gosh. Okay. And my 10 minutes are up.
Wow, Jeannie, thank you so much for providing us with such powerful context for your work tonight. It's such a pleasure to have you here at Sitka. Next up is Kai Hynes. Kai is a performing artist and educator living in Portland, Oregon. Coming from theater, but drawn to making outside of traditional frameworks, he is interested in developing personal projects that are body-oriented, site-specific, semi-improvisational, and anti-anthropocentric, influenced by Butoh, fantasy, and the natural world. He works in various capacities with Shaking the Tree Theater, Portland Experimental Theater Ensemble, and Hand to Mouth Theater, and teaches devised theater pedagogies to students in schools as a local visiting artist. He holds a BA in Theater and English from the University of Portland and is a graduate of Portland Experimental Theater Ensemble's Institute for Contemporary Performance. Sitka community, please join me in giving Kai a warm welcome.
Hello, I'm Kai. Really happy to be here. This is my second-ish week. I'm loving it, living my postal hermit fantasy. And so a little bit about what I do. I've worked in the professional theater world of Portland for several years, but the last like 3-ish years, my interest in performance started to diverge a little from what many would consider theater. I was becoming interested in Butoh, which, if you're not familiar, is a kind of Japanese anti-dance form, which is important to me as a second-gen Japanese person. So Butoh, performance art, ritual art, land art, and site-specific performance. So basically anything that happens outside of a theater. I work a lot with symbolic imagery and movement. I also just like rolling around in dirt and putting things in my mouth. I do stuff that's generally raw and kind of uncomfortable to watch. But it's not so much that I do it for shock factor, that I do it for kind of sharing an untranslatable feelings and observations, offering a new modality for experiencing and connecting with the world. It's sort of a meditative practice that I like to share. So I thought I would share a few work examples that are somewhat recent. Okay, this first piece is called Mud. Created it with a friend. We were dressed as beach trash, inspired by mud and shorelines being kind of like a meeting of two things. And it was kind of a reflection of our biracial, bicultural upbringings. It was very cold, almost got pneumonia. Another piece, This is Exuvier, followed around by a flashlight in the woods. The piece was inspired by cicadas and shedding skin after long periods of time. This was inspired by also my experience with my partner who is trans as she was transitioning. So yes. Sorry, I'm like really nervous for some reason. I do this as a living kind of, but like it doesn't get easier. And then it's a piece called A Petty Attempt at Reconciliation. I made it with a friend, Jordan DeLauder, who was a past resident here actually, and it's kind of the reason I'm doing this program. So he's doing a project on deforestation and clear-cut forests in the coastal range near where we are now. He wanted to work together on this photo project using Buto, kind of its connection to death and spirits, but also channeling and transformation and empathy, hence the title. So I felt that this is like maybe the least that we could try to do in the wake of these things. And then this is my most recent project called Horseplay. It's a little different because it was actually in a theater this time. Maybe the most different, but the ideas are similar. We were calling this a dream ballet inspired by the play Equus. And my friend Annabelle and I, we were kind of both horses and humans and neither at the same time in this dream world. We were watching and interacting with horses, learning about connection and trust, and actually learning a lot about ourselves through them. So again, kind of using these natural images and beings to talk about ourselves. And so for my project at Sitka, I knew I wanted to do some Buto inspired stuff in nature. And instead of doing a performance with an audience, because I didn't want to try to coordinate getting people here and working with the weather here, I was going to do something on the beach, but actually the weather's been really nice. I probably could have done it. But I'm challenging myself, and I am instead doing a kind of a durational performance video project with trail cameras. And so the idea is that the performance that's being captured never really ends, and that the world is as much a dancer as I am. So I'm hoping to get deer and wind and rain and occasionally myself, but really it's kind of like a moving land art project. This project has me thinking a lot like an animal in order to try and get some footage of them. Like I'm looking at their poop, I'm looking at hoof prints, I'm thinking about where I'd be if I was an animal. And I kind of go into this animal mode when I get into the Buto headspace. Actually, my first time working on this project out in the woods behind the campus, I stripped down, put some wet rice flour on my face, like started getting tactile with the moss. And then suddenly, like immediately, I started hearing this like baby coyote or something really close to me. I couldn't find it. I didn't want to, but it was almost like it suddenly didn't know whether to register me as human or not, which is kind of funny. So anyways, I wanted to show a little bit of what I've got so far over the past 2 to 3 days. I'm working kind of slow, don't really know how to use trail cams well or like video editing technology, but I still don't really know what the order I want this project to be in. But I know that I'm focusing less on narrative than I usually am. So I'm going to show that. Oh, I'm also nude in it. that's what I have so far. I'll be doing a showing at an event in Portland in February. It's an experimental performance cabaret style thing. And I'll be showing a cut of footage and adding some live component to either mixing sounds that I capture or covering myself in moss or something. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kai. I am really excited to see where this site-specific project that you started at Sitka ends up taking you. That was really cool. Next tonight, we have Camilla Taylor. Camilla is recognized for their monochromatic and intensely introspective works on paper and sculpture, which utilize figurative and architectural forms. Taylor's artworks reflect the viewer's internal lives, as well as collective issues we experience as a society. Raised in Provo, Utah, Taylor attended the University of Utah and received a BFA in 2006 and an MFA from California State University at Long Beach in 2011. Taylor lives in Los Angeles, California, with their partner and 4 cats. Camilla?
Hi. I apologize. I'm kind of out of sorts, so I just keep asking for patience and forgiveness, like all of us in Los Angeles right now. My pronouns are she, he, they. If you're interested in seeing more of my work, you can find me at camillataylor.com or Camilla Taylor on Instagram. Most of my work is very figurative and minimalistic. My goal is to kind of give someone a sense of something that's familiar, but that they're not quite sure where they've seen it before, because I want it to feel like it's pulled from a part of themselves that maybe they were not 100% familiar with before. I work in ceramic, sculpture, and printmaking, and have been working lately with combining a lot of materials together to create kind of these different interactions between the materials that say something interesting and new. So here's some just quick visions of what I have made in the past and to get a sense of what I've done. So these are from my show, Your Words in My Mouth from 2020, which was about liars and how people can shape reality with their words, which I feel like climate change deniers are trying really hard to do right now and somehow not succeeding. This one is about how we're all in some ways liars, continuously telling these stories to ourselves about who we are, constantly trying to reinvent ourselves as a way to live with ourselves. I think if we're always 100% aware of the actions that we do, it's kind of an unlivable experience to truly know yourself and to truly understand the cruelty that we kind of commit on a daily basis. This piece many times over is made up of 12 houses that are all made from the same pattern that each individual house is then modified slightly. And I consider this a portrait of a mind, with each house a metaphor for a mind. But a human being is that every time you reinvent yourself, you become a slightly new thing, and there's no true self. There's just sort of this amalgamation of the different versions of the self. And then at the end of the show, I had a collection of glass sculptures that were stairs, using that same metaphor of the mind as the way we sort of travel between the private and the public performances of the self, the stairs being the means in between those modalities. And then in 2022, I was able to show in Tokyo, Japan at Conde and Olivier Gallery, and I'm in a 3-person show there opening on February 1st. If you are lucky enough to be in Tokyo right now, please check it out. I wish I were in Tokyo on February 1st, so sadly I'll have to miss it, but it's an incredible space. And this show, Quiet Friend, was about how there are these animals that adapt well to the spaces we build, that live beside us, how we build these environments. And then there are animals that are so suited to the same things that we are, and we hate them. Pigeons carry no diseases that are communicable to humans, but we hate them. And so many of the animals that live with us cannot hurt us, but we sort of invent these stories to hate them. And I think part of it is sort of this deep dislike also for what we build for ourselves. So this was a piece about the starlings, which are ubiquitous around the world. And this is about the grease moth, which is the only lepidopteran that has been shown to eat parts of the human body. So I thought of it as this animal that lives beside us. It's really unnoticed for the most part. And then when we die, it can take a part of ourselves and take that and make it something new. There's a tiny starling inside of the head. So when you look into the neck, you'll see this little curled up starling. When I was a teenager, I worked at a Japanese antique gallery, and there was a statue of a Buddhist monk, and out of his mouth was a little wire and then tiny statues of the Buddha. And it was a visualization of a prayer. Each tiny Buddha was an incantation. And I've had that vision in my head ever since I saw it as this way to visualize the thing that is invisible. And I've started using beads as a means to visualize repetition and things that are invisible, like actions that are repeated over and over. And they're also an object that's ubiquitous, but shows up so often in many traditions. Dry Tree was another recent show about the Anthropocene and how we affect the environment. So another example of my work with fabrics and ceramic together. This was the final piece in Dry Tree. These were branches from my olive tree that just burned down. And then a recent solo show that I had last year at the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, the knot, this piece, The Eye of God, was made up of 307 tiny sparrows. And these guys. And the idea behind it was to think about the moment when a human being becomes a distinctive entity, when the umbilical cord is tied. So these are newborn babies with their umbilical cord not still attached. And they're the breath, the thought, and the word. So the different moments when you become an entity, when you physically breathe in, when you are thought of as an entity by someone or by yourself, and then when you are spoken as an entity. And then Sitka, my incredible experience at Sitka felt like also a residency, like a friendship residency, because I was there almost most of the time, just Kiyomi and I, and we've known each other for over a decade, but it felt like really rediscovering this person who I've always loved in a new way. And we had all of these little traditions suddenly together. So this was our New Year's dinner that we made. Kiyomi made us udon noodle soup, and I made us hot chai, and we tried to eat it at the beach, but it was too cold and we had to eat in the car instead. And one of the things that I did on these long hikes is I kept collecting mushrooms to experiment with spore printing, which is like the least effort of printmaking imaginable, where you put the cap down on paper and let the spores release and then see what the mushroom makes. And these are some of the spore prints I made that I think I can't take credit for them, really. I think they're so ephemeral and beautiful, and the colors are different with each mushroom in a way that's totally unexpected. You cannot predict what color each mushroom is going to make. And then they're also often three-dimensional because the spores continue to pile up. And it feels a little bit like this collaboration, like instead of I made them, I invited the mushrooms to make them with me. And because Sitka felt like one of the most alive places I've ever been in my life. I've never experienced so much life before. Being able to have this little collaboration with all the fungus there was exciting. This one is Amanita muscaria, and I've never seen one of those in person before. It was so exciting. And it collapsed, and so the orange is the juice from the red cap. Also, while I was there, I rescued a Pacific loon. And I am a bird criminal, but I have fled the state. So I was actually instructed while I was driving the bird to the rescue. I was an hour into my drive, and Oregon Fish and Wildlife called me back finally and said, leave the bird on the beach, don't touch it. And I was like, okay, I did. I haven't touched it. But it was a total lie. I took the bird to a rescue, and it's a huge animal. And it felt like when I was at the beach, the bird kept scooting towards me. It felt like it was really... it knew that I was going to take care of it. And I did, obviously. It never objected when I picked it up, and it never objected when I drove it 2 hours to Portland. And then I heard back from Bird Alliance today, and it's okay. So that's incredible. But while I was there, one of the pieces I worked on was this wall of copper feathers that I've been making from reclaimed copper for a solo show that I'm going to have in December at Track 16. And it felt like a real interesting overlap between meeting this bird and the piece I was working on. To give you a sense of scale, they're kind of larger feathers. And what I'm excited about is like how some of them are going to be quite shiny and some of them will be oxidized. And I also worked on this sort of pieced piece using rags that I've collected from my students. So all of the black, all of the ink in it is what is accrued from cleaning. I had to wear gloves working on them because they were so filthy. Hopefully it'll dry by December. And this is what that piece looks like so far. These are teeny tiny squares. They're 1.5 by 1.5 inches. And I hand sewed this one and I'm working on another one right now. So that's my work. It's interesting. A lot of my work has been about ephemerality and now it has evaporated into the air as well. So maybe there's something poetic about that. I don't know. Be patient with Los Angelinos for a while.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us, Camilla. You may have crossed the Oregon border, but we are actively looking for ways to get you back into a Sitka studio soon. So again, thank you for being here today. It really means a lot. Our last resident presenting this evening is Joshua Berman. Joshua is an independent visual storyteller, writer, and outdoor educator based in northern New Mexico and western Pennsylvania. His place-based photography and videography focuses on conservation, adventure, and travel narratives around the globe. Wherever he may find himself, Joshua purposely seeks out an intimate relationship with the natural world that surrounds him and immerses deeply in local community, working alongside ecologists, educators, and a variety of nonprofit organizations. Thank you for joining us, Joshua.
Thanks. Good to see you, Maria. Camilla, I know we met on my way out of the residency, so nice to see you again. Sorry about everything that's going on in LA.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you again too.
Yeah. And thanks for bearing with me, everybody. To start off a little bit, some of the pieces that I'm going to show are just a few series of things that I was working on during the residency. Just a little snapshot of each. Some are works in progress that I'm going to revisit. Some are just kind of, sit unto themselves. And then I'm not going to show other pieces. It's not quite enough time. And coming into the residency, I had identified a conservation piece focused on the restoration and recovery of Opal Creek, which was if you aren't familiar with it, it's an old growth forest in Central Oregon that had burned down in the Beachy Creek fire in 2020. So coming into the residency, my idea was to go into the forest and document that with my creative writing partner, Christina. Unfortunately, we did not have access to it. And so instead, we shifted gears and focused on just having a relationship develop with Cascade Head and being present there. And she came down from Bainbridge Island and spent a week with me during my 3-week stay. This is just going to dive through some of my work that I did at Sitka. That's the cabin I got to live in. Maria, thank you so much for inviting me to come. I was on the wait list for a few months and a very spontaneous period of time. And it was a perfect timing for me to actually come. I'll dive into some more personal stuff that happened while I was there. So anyway, because Opal Creek didn't happen, I just found myself documenting every day, being around campus, going out to the head. I'd go at sunrise, go in the middle of the day in a rainstorm. I'd go at night under the stars, hang out down at the estuary, and just getting to know the area a little bit more intimately. This was, I think, my first day getting out to Cascade Head, and it had been on my consciousness for a number of years, mainly because of me and Christina and a few of our friends reading aloud the passage that Robin Wall Kimmerer wrote specific about Cascade Head that I think really inspired us to want to spend time out there. And so among our adventures out, we had a very spontaneous meeting with this pair, Catherine and Chase. They're part of the Nature Conservancy. They're doing habitat restoration work. A little back behind the headlands, there's an area of Sitka spruce that's overgrowing into the meadow. And so we went and spent a day out there with them, helping to cut back some of the Sitka spruce and get it really dialed in so it's good, healthy habitat for the silver spot butterfly. And, you know, at the same time, Jake, who's the facilities director for Sitka, has the idea in mind to help restore some of the habitat up on the other part of Sitka's campus. And so he gave us a little tutorial talk about what he's hoping and dreaming to create up there. So Christina's the one in the middle looking up, by the way. You'll see a few nature portraits or environmental portraits of her coming up. Christina and I would spend a lot of our sunsets walking on the beaches, and then she would find trees that she could either climb and hang out in. This was on the hike along Cascade Head and kind of perched over a 300-foot drop below her. And she hung out there and took a nap while I wandered around a little bit. We came upon a herd of elk one day. Obviously, they spent their time on campus, but they were pretty elusive for us until I think day 3 that she was in there. And then at sunset, they came out in big droves, and a pretty special experience with them. And so kind of finishing up on the ranch. And then again, we would spend our sunsets over on the beaches. This was over in Nespelin. Love getting to know all of these areas kind of surrounding the whole bioregion around Cascade Head, and starting to understand the area quite a lot more than just kind of these snapshot visits that I had. I discovered Sitka about 25 years ago, stopped in just briefly, and periodically over the years I would stop in, but this was the first time I got to spend any significant time there. I'd spend time out on the spit, paddle over there, and spend time by myself kind of exploring and playing around. Okay, now my time in residence was a period that overlapped with my dad getting quite sick. So this is him. He would have been 87 in this picture from last summer. I just turned 87 last January. So Dad was quite an athlete, and he was into restoration himself on the land where I grew up, where he raised us. This forest that the Comet is situated over didn't exist whenever they moved onto the property in 1973. And so he planted the trees all around this hillside, and it's popped up into an entire forest 50 years later. Dad was an athlete, distance runner, triathlete, and real inspiration to all of us about health and longevity. Anyway, he developed leukemia, had a diagnosis about a year ago, and over the past few months, I got to have some time with him and just kind of talk about life. And Maria invited me out to the residency, and during that time, his cancer metastasized pretty rapidly, and he passed away exactly a month ago today while I was there. And I got to have time with him in a very different way while I was in that space. And these next few are from the day that he died, and just had this very kind of surrealistic experience. I woke up that morning. He'd been in a coma for about a week after having a massive stroke. And, sitting in that unknown for the week and wondering, has he passed yet? Has he passed? The morning that he did, it was a Saturday morning, and about 6 a.m, this huge windstorm started blowing debris on top of the cabin and woke me up instantly. And I knew, I know it was that kind of moment. And so I read a book written by a counselor based in Taos, where I live. It's about mourning and going through periods of grief. He recommended approaching it from a creative perspective and having some manner of relationship with that, the essence of that emotion, kind of working back and forth between happiness and grief and being present in our natural environment. And so, again, these were all from the day that he died, and it felt like he was embedded, his spirit in some way was embedded in all of this. And I felt like this veil kind of shifted away where I was in physical reality, but at the same time I wasn't. That entire day was just, it was psychedelic in some kind of way. And so these were the images that kind of presented themselves while I was going through that experience with him. In the book as well, Ted Wired, he talked about places of refuge during these times whenever we're going through mourning, and referring to them as descansos. Descansos are an idea of, while somebody's traveling through foreign lands that they're unfamiliar with, they have places of refuge where they can sit and recover and just kind of normalize their life. And I feel like the residency and being there, being in my cabin space, allowed me to have that experience. And so Sitka is my descanso. And this was the night, and it felt like he left. He went up into the sky, and the moon seemed like an eyeball to me. It was just kind of watching over. Close buddy of mine in Los Angeles that night, he's usually an early to bed person. He was up at midnight and had sent me a picture. He said there's this halo around the moon that he had never seen before out of Santa Monica, and sent it to me. And he's like, I think that's your dad in the sky. And it was just, yeah, it was pretty lovely. I'm gonna miss him dearly, but he lived a good life too. One last piece. While I was there, I had this amazing access to the studio, and all of the residents who were keen on doing portraiture with me. I want to develop my photography life a little more in a portraiture style, and so I explored this a little bit with some of the other residents who were there. This is my favorite. Yeah. And so I'm just gonna go through these pretty quickly. So next time I come back, I'll bring my portrait stuff, and everybody's welcome to jump in and get a portrait. Yeah, we had quite a crew. I wish I could have overlapped with all of you. It'd be nice to be able to get portraits of each of you. I do plan to return in probably later June. I think Christina and I are going to come back and work with the Nature Conservancy crew and continue the other side of our documentary. So I had to turn the camera on myself too and get a feel for what it's like to be on that side. And that is that.
Thank you so much, Joshua. And thank you again, Kiyomi, Jeannie, Camilla, and Kai. It is truly an honor and a joy for all of us at Sitka to hold this space for all of you and your practices and refuge. And yeah, thank you all for sharing this evening. Thank you, Sitka community, for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you for our next resident talk. Good night, everybody. Have a great evening. Thank you again.
Thank you. Good to see all of you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.